I love this project. I told you yesterday it was a show house project in New York City. And part of my initial motivation was to create something that I thought was a little more New York. The fun thing, a little tidbit about this I was telling the ladies yesterday, is this ended up in a music video of a very popular musician that a lot of us follow. So y'all have to keep an eye out and see if you can find it. Not the whole space, but the wallpaper. You're going to notice it's really kind of fun. And I think that's because it was so striking and bold and glamorous. It made the perfect backdrop for a theater. And it is a little theatrical, isn't it? But again, not so overwhelming with color that people couldn't feel really comfortable in this space for long periods of time. And the New York population, visitors, people that came to see this show house responded to it so well and even said, "Oh my gosh, Tobi, this is the most chic thing I've ever seen you do." And I think that's because they are used to a little less color on the wall and a more subtle kind of nuance of color in a space. So let's kind of break this down. So the inspiration behind this room was fashion, and really looking at things like couture detailing, like you can't really see in this image, but you will in a minute. There's some banquettes with a little channel back detail that's contrast welt, and the grosgrain on the sofas in black, and the embroidery that I had embroidered on the silk drapery to match the wall covering, and the little tiny hints of gold on the tables and the stools. So again, getting really into detail like fashion does. And even those lamps are like the jewelry of the space, right? They're vintage Murano again. They're gorgeous emerald green, and they just pop like you can imagine a jewel or a big emerald ring on your finger. Certainly the idea of black and white. And this is when I started breaking down these color palettes, you're going to see this is when I really realized how much I use black and white in my work. But looking at different percentages, you'll see in a minute, really makes a big difference, because this room is primarily white, right? The floor is all grounded in black, and there's a few black details. But for the most part, it's really on the light side of the color palette. I was looking for a sophistication by layering in different shades of white. So the walls are slightly more white than the wall covering, which is a grass cloth with that pattern on it. The sofa is slightly more cream, as are the drapes. But you don't really notice when you glance at it. It all looks like it's essentially the same color. And it's that little bit of depth. Then you even see the cream finish on the table, even a little richer, but it's tiny little changes in color. The blush pink chairs to a tiny bit darker or a little bit bolder pillow, down to the leather that's on the stool. And also remember our conversation yesterday about content, fabric content. So even just in this image, going from wool here to silk here to leather here, and seeing what that does to create and enhance the depth and the interest in this color palette. And it's not hard to do. You just have to pay attention and think about how those little shifts and changes can really start making a difference in the space. Even looking at the difference in kind of the muted black of the grass cloth, black in the artwork, a matte black book, and then a shiny black on the fireplace in a lacquer finish. So much layering happening in this space. And then let's think about kind of the percentages. So maybe 70% of the room is black and white, but really it's more like almost 70% of the room is white, right? Maybe 60. But that's really the base of this space. And then I would say maybe 25% of the space is these shades of pink, pink and blush and peach. And then just a tiny little, like 5, maybe even 1% of the space is this little pop of emerald green. So we talked about yesterday that one room that was all blue, and what would happen if you started layering in orange or pink, even the pink in the the Chihuly painting over the mantle, and how just being in that one spot made the room still monochromatic. But if we had started moving that color around the space, it would have totally changed. And this is, you can really start to see that in this space, what would happen. Or what would happen if you had no pink. It would be really much more stark and dramatic, right? So this softens it a whole lot. Here's another another angle of the room. And I love seeing this as we've broken it out for you. You can almost imagine these color blocks even as if they really were paints when you start seeing them as pure color. And it could help you take these same colors and bring them into your space. You could create the same color palette and even put pink on the wall in a room, or the kind of emerald or spearmint sort of green on the wall, and have a completely different look, but this palette would still work really well. Yes?
And it seemed like even from at least the last slide, even the ceiling, there were nuances in the shades of green.
The ceiling is a silver leaf wallpaper, but it's really it's a warm silver, so it almost just enhances like another layer of that creamy warmth in it. So, and it also speaks to sort of the jewelry of the space, like the gold on the table and the gold lamps, because it's actually a silver leaf, but it's very leaning towards gold. Mm-hmm. And then I did pink in the light fixture. It's a pink crystal with a gold metal base, and it really reflected, and even though the light bulbs were clear, it almost created this sort of pink glow to the ceiling, which was a really fun detail too. I'm glad you noticed that.
We have a couple questions coming in about this space, Tobi. One from Nikki is the ceiling, tell us again, is the ceiling painted or wallpaper?
The ceiling is wallpapered, and it's wallpapered. The interesting thing is this room was actually used for a show house prior to this. It's a show house in New York City that happens every year. And so that's kind of a fun thing, because designers will come in from one year to the next and design the same rooms, and they'll look completely different. And this one, the ceiling wallpaper was actually already there. And the person who owns the building said, I really like that. I would prefer if you not touch it. And I loved it. It was great because I had already designed this color palette, and it was such a great addition to it. But I do know that it is a Philip Jeffries wall covering, and it was installed by cutting it into squares and installing each one. You can see that more in this picture. Installing each one as individual squares of wall covering, and so that adds almost a parquet effect. So again, that goes back to that subtle nuance of our patterning yesterday. It's a texture because it's got a sheen to it, and it also is installed in a pattern. It could have been just laid flat on rolls in that space, but a decision was made to put it in squares, which of course I love because there's a million squares in my wall covering. So it was the perfect kind of nod to a pattern that I had already chosen to install in the space. So that was what we call in the design industry a happy accident, that was already there. So, but it looks really great.